Lethal Company is a game about hauling scrap out of facilities to sell to a shady corporation or even shadier company credits, and most of that scrap has weight to it. The more weight you are carrying, the slower you will move, and the shorter you can run for. It's a relatively simple concept, but for such a core gameplay feature, there is basically no in-depth knowledge that I could find publicly about this mechanic. Seriously, one wiki has a whole 2 sentences dedicated to what is essentially a main gameplay feature, and the other wiki doesn't even have a page talking about it. So I took it upon myself to figure out exactly how the weight in this game works so everyone can be more informed before jumping over a pit carrying 100 pounds. Oh, you can make that. Before jumping over a pit carrying 150 pounds. To start, I felt the most impactful concept to understand about weight is how exactly it affects your movement speed. Sure, carrying more will slow you down, but by how much? Is it linear, or is there a cutoff after you hit a certain weight that will drastically lower your movement? It sure feels that way when you find a cash register. So the first thing I wanted to do was find your base movement speed and then compare that to increasing intervals of weight. But that's when I ran into my first problem. Item weights in Lethal Company are weird. For example, have you ever brought back 4 pro flashlights from the delivery pod and noticed you're carrying 21 pounds despite each one only weighing 5? I'm not sure if this was caused by each flashlight technically weighing 5 1/3 pounds, or weird rounding in the code, but what it meant in practice was that it wasn't as simple as me adding up the items to the weights I wanted to test. Luckily, there's many different items in Lethal Company, and with you being able to hold up to 4, I was able to find 5 combinations for testing the weights. Or 6 if you count the items I held for 0 pounds. 2 7-pound hair dryers and 1 5-pound old phone weigh exactly 20 pounds. Don't do the math, the company already did it for you. 2 old phones, a tragedy mask, and a flask weigh 40 pounds. 2 tattered metal sheets and a hair dryer weigh 60 pounds. 2 tea kettles and 2 gift boxes weigh 80 pounds. And last but not least, 1 gold bar, 1 golden cup, and 1 hair dryer weigh 100 pounds. Now that I had all the correct weights available, all I needed to do was find employee speed while holding them, and I would be able to compare them. Unfortunately, a meter stick is one of the few items you can't buy in the company store, so I had to get creative. Let me introduce what I came up with: the interior ship scale. In the effort of keeping my results as accurate as possible, I performed this setup to measure speed. 1. Line myself up with the default placed red cabinet. 2. Walk into the hydraulic door. 3. Count the frames between me leaving the door and stopping at the launch control. Doing this will give me the distance, one ship interior, crossed in seconds, which we can compare to the values acquired when carrying different weight amounts to see exactly how much slower you move when carrying more weight. Unfortunately, this won't be perfect, as factors as where my crosshair is lined up will give me different results, so I ran each test 3 times and took the average for the final speed comparison. Let's see how the different weights do. So the results are in. Carrying 0 pounds, you cross the ship in 3.1 seconds. Carrying 20 pounds, you cross the ship in 3.68 seconds. 40 pounds took 4.27 seconds. 60 pounds took 4.86 seconds. 80 pounds took 5.47 seconds. And 100 pounds took a brisk 6.03 seconds. Now that we have our test results, you may notice a pattern. Each interval increases the time required by around 35 frames, or roughly adding half a second to each trip. Despite being a linear increase, your movement speed is reduced harsher for your first pieces of scrap. You move about 15% slower from your first 20 pounds, but 27% slower at 40, instead of 30%. If you're curious, you move 36% slower at 60 pounds, 43% slower at 80 pounds, and about 48% slower at 100 pounds. For fun, I also wanted to see what you would move at if carrying the most weight possible, achieved with 3 gold bars and 1 cash register. Very common scenario, I know. This took a blisteringly fast 12.37 seconds, over 4 times slower than when carrying nothing. Yippee! So if all you wanted to know was how much slower you become for how much scrap you carry, you're good to go. I also checked a couple weights I thought would be most useful to employees. You move about 5% slower with the Pro flashlight, about 7% slower with the shovel, and around 11% slower when you're carrying both. But you may notice the video is not over yet, and that's because I haven't asked you to subscribe yet. Also because the other attribute affected by weight is how long you can sprint for. Something you may have noticed while playing Lethal Company is your stamina bar doesn't drain right away when you start sprinting, and you can still sprint for a little bit after your bar is depleted. I'm not sure why this is, but I find it easier to visualize the sprint bar as a complete circle even though the game only shows you a portion. To test how weight affects your stamina, we simply need to collect our scrap again and run as long as we can until we are unable to sprint anymore. Let's see what happens. If you're noticing a pattern, me too, kid. Much like with your speed, how long you can sprint for is more significantly impacted from your first few pieces of scrap. Meaning if you need to run from something, even if you aren't carrying much, it's worth it to drop it. And when fighting, dropping your scrap before scrapping, get it, can give you the edge you need to win. It might even be worth dropping your flashlight too against enemies like the Nutcracker or the Bracken to dodge that extra 5% faster. That's everything I wanted to cover in this video. I'd like to thank you all for the support on my channel recently. I've been the Roadside Attraction, and thanks for watching.